I am always in search of balance. And thank you. And each week we will provide and create a brave space where we can engage in conversations around topics of recovery.
Our intention is to hold and inspire better spaces for more people in recovery by tackling issues sometimes used to separate us.
Yes, but before we do that, please like, share, and comment. Or like, comment, and share on this. I'm stumbling.
Let them know that we have new lines and we are trying new things.
Absolutely. And ding that bell. That's the line I do now.
Ding that bell. Okay. And we have a disclaimer. Okay, let me take a deep breath. I'm going to try to do this all in one breath. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on at the CCC are ours alone. We do not represent anyone but the material and information shared here is for general information purposes only. In other words, we are just friends behind a mic here to entertain you. I did it! Entertain. So we have a special guest today. Our guest today's name is Mike.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, Mike.
Hi.
Thank you for joining us today.
So glad to be here.
So before we give you our 3 questions, let's talk a little bit about how we're doing today. How are you, Louis?
Well, obviously, I'm at home. I woke up with a bit of a scratchy
It is
throat.
obvious. There's a mural of you behind you. Can you
shut up
on your mural? So for folks at home, if you're just listening, Louis has a mural that was painted of him by Min, and it's behind his camera,
and it's quite lovely.
It is quite lovely.
It looks like your hands are holding your head, like cradling your head.
Oh, they do look like that.
Cradling your head.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Absolutely.
We interrupted you.
No, you didn't. That's fine. I'm good. Other than that, I'm fine. It's just really cold and it's rainy, and so I'm so grateful for technology because otherwise I wouldn't be able to be with you today.
Yeah, that would have been really sad. I would have been really sad if you weren't here.
We are grateful you're here as well.
Yeah, it is really rainy today. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was going to say, I'm super grateful I'm here too. Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
Thank you for having me as a guest. And yeah, it is wet. It is just, if you are in California, you know we have had a wet winter. I mean, we need the rain and all, but come on now.
It has been really wet. Yeah. It has been a really wet winter. Okay. So
you guys just say wet again because I'm getting wet. That's hot.
That's such low-hanging fruit. That is some debase. You are better than that.
No, am I?
You're better. Brandon is shaking his head. You are not better than that.
Yeah.
So before we go into our questions, I'm great. I'm doing pretty good. Am I doing pretty good? Yeah, I've been doing pretty good. I leave for a conference tomorrow. It's a work-related conference in LA, so I'm looking forward to that. Actually, I'm not looking forward to that. I hate traveling, even if it's just an hour. But that is coming up. And what else is going on? That's pretty much it. Things are pretty good for me. Okay, Mike, 3 questions for you in 3 minutes. I'm going to set my timer. Okay, so your 3 questions are, and then, so tell us about where you grew up, what made you get sober, and how do you connect to your higher power, and go.
So I grew up across the bay in Oakland, California. Shout out to Oakland. I grew up in a family where image and perception was everything. Mm-hmm. So I learned that everything was fine at a very early age. I am a gay man. I grew up in the 70s when I had no reference to being gay. So it was not okay. I knew something was wrong. So I immediately learned that I was unworthy, which leads right into today's topic about shame and relapse. So what got me sober was that I needed to learn how to face who I was. I spent my whole life living a lie. I spent my whole life presenting however you needed me to present in order to get by. So the best way to numb that out was through drugs and alcohol. I am 5 years clean and sober from drugs and alcohol, and I've been on this journey for about 8 years. I connect through to my higher power through prayer and meditation. I have a very strong belief in the strength of spirit, that we are all connected, that we do this together. I don't have a religious sort of viewpoint on things. It's much more about the universal power of healing, love, and connection.
That's really, really nice. Did we get to the last one? So we have where you're from, God, what made you get sober? Yeah, you did it. You did it in under 3 minutes. Very nice. Very
That
nice.
that was actually quite hilarious. It's like, and go, and you're looking at
That
your watch the whole
was-
time.
Yeah.
Make your mark.
Let's
That's
go.
right.
Let the world know that, most people, they have like 15 minutes here. So like 3 minutes in, let's go. That's wonderful. That's a lot of similarities in there. And a really nice segue into today's topic, which is relapse. So how do we kind of prevent relapse? How do we prevent ourselves from, if we do relapse, dipping into shame or falling into shame?
Yeah. And I think oftentimes for myself, shame would beget the relapse, which would beget the shame, So it was a vicious cycle for me. I was on a revolving door for quite some time. And I can honestly say that it was my feelings of shame and unworthiness that often led me to want to check out. And I think that's a universal theme for people who are abusing and addicted to substances, is that feeling of unworthiness, that feeling of shame is so powerful and so heavy that the easiest way for me was to get high. It happened in milliseconds. And then all of a sudden I forgot all of that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Shame and guilt, which are so closely related. You're reminding me, I'm also in SLAA, and I remember at the time I was like struggling with if it's not drugs and alcohol, we're spending or we're eating, right? And so for a long time I was hooking up. And so I didn't realize how linked up shame was with hooking up, like the fuel behind it, or the fuel behind using was shame, until one day my sponsor said to me, Anthony, like right after you hook up, why don't you just give me a call and say like, hey, by the way, I hooked up. And I remember thinking like, that is the weirdest thing, right? And so I remember I called him up right after hooking up, and he goes, well, how was it? And I was like, oh, it was great. And then he was like, all right, well, good. And it was in that moment I was like, someone just told me it was okay. So that it took the shame right out of the like hooking up experience. And I noticed like that the impulse was relieved a little bit. So I should have, shame has certainly motivated some of my behaviors, and I didn't realize it was motivating my behaviors.
Yeah. Well, I think, the sort of the flip side to shame is worthiness. And so when we're feeling we're unworthy, I'm quoting the mistress of shame, Miss Brene Brown, right?
Thank you.
Miss Brene. So, shame and vulnerability. But really, when we're feeling unworthy, when we're feeling that shame is the first thing that comes up, right? We're less than. I spent my life feeling less than. And, I presented really well. So when I came out in my disease, my addiction, people around me were like, what are you talking about? Well, I presented really well because I didn't want you to see that unworthiness. I didn't want you to see that shame, because in my opinion, my belief was that as soon as you found out, you'd be gone. You were out of here. And so I was trying to preserve whatever little sense I could by masking it. And as we know, and I know we'll get into this discussion, we have to be able to share it. We have to be able to let it go. We have to be able to connect with people in recovery in order to heal. And that connection is all powerful.
Absolutely. So for folks, if you're listening at home and, we're throwing around the word shame, so I want to read a definition of shame. A painful feeling of humiliation or distress caused by the consciousness of wrong or foolish behavior, be that perceived or actual. To your point about connecting with other people in the fellowship, one of the things that there's a TED Talk, it's not Brene Brown. There's a TED Talk of a guy who says like the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connection. Yeah. And that's certainly the case for me. I feel like it's been through connection that I've been able to heal through shame. As you were speaking, I was thinking of, it's like a fear of being seen. If you spend your whole life having people tell you how horrible you are, or you have experiences that make you feel like you're a horrible person, then of course you don't want to be seen. right? And so I think some of the healing happens in like having community that actually sees you and loves what they see.
Absolutely. This is a bit of a full circle moment for me, actually. When I first came to the CCC, I met up with some folks and they said, come with us. We're going to go get a burrito up the street. So we went up the street to grab a burrito. Now, side note, my office of 25 years is literally around the corner from the club. So I know this community well and the community knows me. So we went up the street to get a burrito and everyone was sitting at the table, around the table, and they all started talking about their recovery, loud and proud and out. And I was just coming to terms with it. And I literally said, people, I have to leave. Like, I can't be here for this.
It's too much.
It's too much. And they apologized and said, oh, no, we'll tone it down. And so to go from that to being on a podcast to speaking to the millions of people out there listening to this.
Right on.
Thousands.
or my mom, whoever's this. Is for me a huge journey and one that I feel really proud about. And it's the connection to all of you that enables me to walk through life with my head held high, to take my sobriety as my biggest, most proud accomplishment. I've done a lot in my life, but nothing compares to getting and staying clean and to building a life in this community. I'm very involved in this community and it's the biggest joy as well. You know, once we get through all of that shame and people around us start to bolster us up for who we are, we get to actually live in self-esteem. It's pretty magical.
Yeah. One of the things I like to think is that, and I've heard this said before, is that, you know, we make God the happiest when we are exactly as we were meant to be. You know, and it's like, and I think a big part of that is like when the more I discover who I am and the more I like live in my truth, I hate saying things like that, but it seems true. Applicable here. Like the more I live in my truth, there is a kind of ripple effect that gives people permission to do the same, you know, and there's a lot of healing that happens in that. And I'm also, you know, I'm of the belief that when you're doing your thing and I'm doing my thing, like we are in the presence of God. You know, and like that's where a lot of healing happens, you know. Louis, were you going to say something? Because I wanted to go ahead.
Well, no, I just the way you put that, living in self-esteem, I love that. I'd never heard it like that and constantly thinking about it. But as far as to the topic today, it's like I was kind of like thinking, well, what do I have to offer? But I realized that all of my experiences with relapse, with struggling with my addiction happened before I came to the rooms, where I stayed out there because of the shame, because of the guilt, because I didn't have the right tools or the right information. I've been fortunate enough, knock on wood, to not have had to experience that. So after I got over myself, like Miss Billy always says, I realized that the best way I can be for other people who are struggling is to not make their shit about me. Meaning, when somebody goes through something, even though it's hard not to see yourself in someone else who's struggling. I can't make their humanity or about myself. I get to be here, be as loving as I can and supportive as I can, and not make their struggles about me. And I found that that's been the best that I can bring, or the way I can show up and be supportive.
Absolutely. And you know, this whole idea around the shame that leads to relapse, that's not just about recovery from drugs and alcohol. You know, I find myself feeling like an imposter in all areas of my life at times. And, you know, the first thing I instinctively do is shrink down into unworthiness. Like, let me just be quiet and let me just sort of not rock the boat, when, you know, I believe that God wants us to stand tall. And as you said, when I'm living in my truth, when I'm living in my power, then the people around me feel that as well. There's a great, I don't know who said it, if it was Nelson Mandela or he says something about, you know, who are you to...
Or Nicki Minaj.
Or Marianne Williamson. Somebody said, you know, who are you to not live your truth?
Right.
You know, God put you on this earth to rise and to shine and to allow other people to live in that light.
Yeah. So there in the big book, it says we crawl before no one, right? We crawl before no one.
Yeah.
So I wanted to take a little bit, like to reverse a little bit and to talk about, so relapse is certainly part of my story. And I appreciated what Louis said about like that the struggles he had were before he came into the rooms, right? So in thinking about what it was like trying to get sober and like when I had the relapse, so number one thing is that I've heard people say that relapse is kind of like this bad word, that like what it suggests is not, it's almost like antithetical to recovery, because it says like you've lost everything, or there's this kind of regression. You've had some people that say, well, relapse is part of recovery. Then you have other people that say, no, relapse is not part of recovery. Relapse, to me, number one, confirmed that I had a problem. It confirmed that I had a problem over and over and over again. Like when it didn't stick the first time or the second time or the third time or the fourth time, because that's how many times it took, it confirmed for me that I certainly had a problem. And that's the thing that clicked for me. Right. So,
Absolutely.
Right. And so that relapse was integral. Is so much of my I needed that understanding. I needed the pain, and I needed to like see that all the things that I could come up with were not going to work, because nothing I came up with would work. I think the second part of that is then, when I ran out of ideas, the only ideas that I had left were literally the ones that I was hearing in the rooms. And I said, okay, fine. I'll try that. What was your journey to that? What did the relapses look like? Not necessarily the details of like what you were doing, but like, what were the things you were thinking at the time?
So to be really honest,
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to stop and not die,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't.
You didn't die.
And I didn't die, and I didn't really want to stop. Like my sponsor has a wonderful way of saying, that's a great story for somebody who wants to keep using. The excuses that we make up and the reasonings that we can't do what is suggested of us. That's a great story.
Can I interrupt you just quickly?
Sure.
When you say you didn't want to stop, can you say more about that? Like, what is it that you didn't want to stop? Like, what was it doing for you that you didn't want to go without?
Yeah. So it was my escape, right? It was my escape from what I felt at the time was a reality that was too much. And so for me, using was an instantaneous form of relief. My brain went a million miles an hour. And as soon as I got high, as soon as I had a drink, it slowed down. Mm-hmm. It was something that was familiar. It was reliable. I knew what, it was like an old blanket. And at the same time, it was killing me, and I knew it was killing me, and I knew I had to stop. And so what I tell people when they say, how did you get to where you are, is I never gave up and I didn't die. That's really what it was. I never gave up. I always came back. There was this survival instinct that has been in me since childhood. Like, I need to survive. And that survival instinct kept me alive while I was figuring it out. And I also believe that relapse does not take you back to square one. I believe I know people in recovery that have never relapsed, and they have an amazing story. And I know people, myself, you, who are sitting here who do have relapse as their story, who also have an amazing journey and an amazing story to tell. And I learned a lot each time around. I had a sponsor who said to me, if you want to quit, if you honestly and deeply want to stop and you're willing to tell me the truth, I will be here for you. And that's when I tell my sponsees, it doesn't always happen immediately. And sometimes the truth comes a little bit later on down the road, but it comes, and we heal and we grow. And one day, like you, I said, I'm out of options. Like, this isn't working. My way isn't working. And believe me, I am the type of person who likes to accomplish things. And I thought I could just tackle this and beat it, until I realized that surrender was the only way to make this work. It continued to fight me. And so one day I just finally gave up and I just surrendered. And, that was the last day that I used. And then about 7 months later, I had a spiritual awakening. I cannot tell you how. On Wednesday, I wanted to use, and on Thursday, I didn't, and I never have since, except that one day it just happened. And I thank God for that moment.
Yeah, that's what you're describing feels like the mystery of recovery. No one really understands why it works the way it does. Like, I could look at it scientifically, but no one knows. No one knows. The other thing I want to put a circle around is the point that you made, which is like, you came back because you're alive, and that's the thing that kills me. That people don't make it.
That's right.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? They just don't make
That's
it.
right.
And one of the things that kind of like moves me is like when I see people who go out and come back, like the one thing I wish I could get through their heads is like, you're alive because you're supposed to be alive. Just the other day, I walked by a dead body. I live in the TL. That's commonplace in the TL. There was a dead body. They had to come pick her up. She had OD'd, right? And so when someone comes into the rooms after they had been out, like that's the one thing, like, I'm like, listen, I know it feels like you want to die. I know it feels like you're not supposed to be here, but you have no idea. You just won the life lottery.
That's right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like, we don't always get that. You know, we don't always get that. There's some people that I'm thinking of one person in particular. I get so worried because you only get so many second chances.
That's right.
You know, you only get so many second chances. For folks listening at home, as usual, we'd love to hear your comments. If you have them, any thoughts coming up, if you have any experiences with relapse that you want to share, please share them. The other thing that came up for me, Mike, while I was listening to you was one of the best things that happened to me in early recovery was when I came back, I felt was filled with shame. I was filled with shame. It took everything inside of me to come to a meeting. And I remember when they asked newcomers to raise their hand, I didn't want to raise my hand. And I'm telling you, I was filled with shame. I just wanted to fucking die. I told myself after this meeting, I'm not coming back. And there's a fellow in the room who I always share this story. I won't say his name, but I remember I turned to him and he goes, "Did you relapse?" And I go, "Yeah." He goes, "Girl, I relapse all the time. Don't worry about it." And I remember like the shame was just sucked right out of my body. It was like the biggest act of love and compassion and empathy that anyone could have shown me 10 years ago. That was 10 years ago. And I'm still talking about it today. I'm really good friends with him, you know? And I'm like, and it was just that one person who said, listen, like, you don't have to hate yourself as much as you're hating yourself right now.
Yeah. Sometimes we don't even know what we're going to do when we speak to a newcomer and how that might impact people. But I'm with you 100%. I used to go to an AA meeting at 7:00 every morning. And I was a revolving door. It was not the program for me. My program is Crystal Meth Anonymous. However, you name it, I can't do it.
Yeah.
So drugs, alcohol, it doesn't really matter. But where I found my people was in CMA. And so I was in this great big room at 7:00 in the morning, and and all this time, all these old timers, and I would be raising my hand as a newcomer. And I finally, I couldn't, I got to the point where I couldn't do it. There was so much shame. And, if there was one thing I wish I could do for people, would be to help them see the unnecessary power of shame. I mean, I guess there is some necessity to it. There's a great learning tool that comes with it, but it's so pervasive and it's such a human condition. We all have it, and yet it feels like we're the only ones, right? It feels like this shame is mine. And all it takes is one other person to say to you, I see your shame. Like, I see your shame. It's my shame too.
Right.
And then all of a sudden it starts to drop
Your
away.
shame is my shame too. Yeah. I think, we have a comment, and just in a second before we get that comment, what's occurring to me is that shame, what you're saying is that there is like some utility to shame. I think shame, like the utility of shame is as dubious as we say anger is, right? Because in my experience as an addict and an alcoholic, is that I will suck the life out of any horrible feeling. You know what I mean? Give me any horrible feeling, and I'm just going to beat myself with it. So yes, there is utility, and as an addict and an alcoholic, I will abuse that utility.
Yeah, my sponsor calls it catastrophizing. So or catastrobating.
Catastrobating.
I have a question for Louis, but let's take this comment first, and then we'll go to my question for Louis.
Jaylon.
Jaylon is our special comment.
Exactly.
Now, Jaylon writes, in almost 3 years, I've been to many meetings and have bared witness to a lot of relapse and returns. That being said, I've also witnessed how members in our community can induce shame by way of subliminally or directly expressing their disappointment for people who keep coming back and give certain people more grace than others.
I have a thought about this.
Yeah.
There's a big Friday night meeting that we have here in the Castro. Big Friday, like 100 people in that room. This old timer one time sat in that room, and he had been my sponsor
I think
years
I know
before.
I think I know what you're going to say.
And he said something like, and it was a while ago and I blocked it, but he said something like, you know, for those of you who keep relapsing, and he looked right at me and he goes, it's not pretty. And I was in, and I was,
queen.
I like I just shrunk down to like nothing. And then of course I called my sponsor and I was like, how dare he? You know, but yes,
I'm tired of that shit.
it doesn't help. It's not.
I'm tired of that shit. I am tired. Let me tell you something. I'm going to rant a little bit. I am so tired of people who like come into rooms and they like pontificate about what recovery is. I'm like, listen, if it didn't come from one of these damn pamphlets or like the big book, like I really don't want to hear it. I don't like, I understand that like, you know, we share our experience, strength, and hope, but it's like, to me, it's very toxic and it's very damaging when we take liberties. I heard someone say something very similar. It was very shaming about, and I won't say what they said because a lot of people were like, so they'll know it. But yeah, I get that.
Yeah. There's no place.
You need to leave. You need to leave.
Right?
Yeah.
I don't need you shaming me. I came in here with shame. I just relapsed.
Yeah.
Like, I need your love.
Yeah. You know, and it's like the other thing is like, in my experience, both professionally and personally, addicts and alcoholics, we're already saying the worst fucking things to ourselves. You know what I mean? Like the last thing you need is for someone outside of you to be like, yeah, you should feel like shit.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, to have somebody verbalize that. You know what I will say, and I'm a part of CMA and AA, and what I find at times is like I will go to CMA meetings and there will be a lot of the same individuals relapsing or whatever. And what I find that the best thing I can do is to give myself a little bit of a break. Maybe because you know how to say it's like if I don't have it to give, I can't give it. And so if I'm sitting in judgment, that's a problem. And so I step away, but I come back because I think that's important too. Because I think that folks need to know. They need to know that you know, recovery is possible. Recovery is possible no matter what. And I love the idea that when folks say you get it when you get it, that's it, plain and simple. Like you were talking about the mystery of recovery. There's nothing that I'm doing that's different than what other people are doing. It is by God's grace that I've managed to stay sober. But I have definitely had moments where I was uncertain, where I slipped away from meetings, where I was just kind of showing up and saving face, you know, or you know, like just going through the motions. So it's like I realized that early on, I'm like, you need to be vigilant. You need to be vigilant about what you're doing because it's so easy to fall off track. And so I completely understand, like when they say, the old timers say, like, I'm not surprised when people use again. I'm surprised when they stay sober because it is what the hell I knew, you know? This is what I knew. It's kind of like when you were talking about, Mike, when you were talking about no drinking, continuing to drink or continuing to use, knowing that you needed to stop. It's what I know. Why am I going to try something I'm not that sure about? You know?
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. So the question I had for you, Louis. So you have 14 years, right? You just celebrated 14 years.
Yeah.
So congratulations. Yeah. So in your 14 years, you've seen a lot of people come in and out. What's been what are maybe some observations you've made of those people? Or like, and I know you've worked with people who've been in and out.
Well, I think for me, and this is just through my lens, the thing that I find most consistent with the ones who struggle is that I used to say when I came in that this is not an interruption of my life, this is my life. Because I needed to kind of be good where I was instead of thinking that, oh, this is taking away from where I could be, which where I could have been was in a gutter somewhere, you know?
Yeah.
So, and then I would also see people, and I made it a point, like, you know, we talk about our tribe and everything. You have folks that like, you know, we would be around talking about recovery and they didn't want to talk about it. You know, they had issue around. And I always felt like, okay, so until you get comfortable with the fact that this is where you are, you're always going to be struggling. I mean, for me, I felt like I had to do the work, so I get past what other people thought about what was going on with me, because everybody who cared about me in my life knew that I needed to be in fucking recovery. That was it, plain and simple. But I think I was so caught up with having that one-sided conversation where I was not so much concerned what you thought, what I thought you thought. And so when I let go of that, and I've had really close friends, unfortunately, they go out, they don't come back. And they don't come back because they feel like they're missing out on something, like they have FOMO. It took me a long time to realize that what I called partying was not partying. I was not having a good time.
Yeah, the party is in here without question.
There's a friend, I have a friend in recovery who says, like, if you're truly doing recovery, like if you're present and she says the truth is riveting, and you can get high if you're truly present. You know what I mean? If you're like in the moment, there's a way. I've certainly, and this is not delusion, but I have certainly had the experience where I'm being so honest and I'm being so present that like I get kind of lifted up.
I completely concur with that. I tell my sponsees and say that, they talk about cash and prizes. When you get to a certain point, you get cash and prizes. And I think oftentimes people think about, cars and houses, but for me, cash and prizes is I get to walk through the world with my head up high. I get to share and experience things with people in a way that, sorry about that, in a way that most people don't get the opportunity to do. We get to connect on a deeper level that most of humanity does not walk around doing.
100%.
And that for me is the blessing of being a part of this program, is the gift of that connection.
I feel like we get so spoiled. 100%. I feel like we get so spoiled because I've had the experience. I've been very fortunate that I have these very meaningful connections and conversations with people, right? We're not always trauma bonding, right? But we have these connections with people. And I feel spoiled because there's a huge recovery community in San Francisco. Spoiled because when I go back home or I'm outside of, this bubble, I sometimes will kind of slip into these conversations and people are like, no, that's too much. It's too much. I don't need to, but the thing is, and my experience of that has been a lot of people are, the way I've heard it described is a lot of people are asleep. A lot of people are engaged in their addictions. A lot of people.
You mean they're not woke?
Oh God. I'm actually, I'm glad you made that joke, because what I'm actually referring to or gesturing toward is in Buddhism, a lot of Eastern philosophy talks about being asleep. And that being asleep is like when we tell ourselves lies, when we're in situations and we're allowing people to walk all over us because we're afraid to speak up, or because we've taken on a job that we hate because we're afraid of the failure, or we're afraid of like the thing that we don't want to do. Right. And I think that's, in my experience, that's what recovery feels like. Like you take risks because you're going to be okay. You'll be protected. What were you going to say?
I have a friend who calls it the deliciousness of life, and I love the word delicious.
Yes,
it's delicious when you're in that. It's not like, as you said, we don't walk around in that state all the time, but more often than not, I am able to have conversations with people that fill me, And my using was about trying to get filled up with something outside of myself, that now I can find in, I know everybody who's going there.
No, I need you to close.
Oh, sorry. But anyway,
Brandon's about to hear that. So whatever it takes.
Yes. So, finding something to fill, as they say, that God-sized hole, right? We were constantly trying to find something. And here, you have to want it and you have to be willing to do the work. One of the things that you said, which I think is really important, or Louis said, one of you said, this is hard work. It's a simple program, but it's for people who are willing to do the work. Like, the rewards are many and great and boundless, but you have to be willing to do the work to get it.
Absolutely.
And part of being an addiction, for me anyway, like that was, it was a lazy way. Like that was the easy way out, right?
And we don't know that. Bonnie Violet said this.
We don't know.
Yeah, Bonnie Violet said this a few months ago. She said, we don't know that we don't know. We don't know what we don't know. And I think that's the reason why we need the fellowship. That's the reason why we connect with other people. That is the reason why the most important person in a room during recovery is the newcomer. they need to, like, I think one of the things that we do is what we live through example that, like, you don't have to be in pain. One of the best things anyone ever told me in early recovery was my very first meeting. Hated the meeting, could not relate to anyone in the room, but there was one guy, he looked at me and he said, Anthony, you never have to drink or use again. That shit pierced my heart. You know what I mean?
Wow.
You know, here I am years later, because I don't think that ever occurred to me. You know, I think the other thing for me too is like, I was in I had to get to the point where I was just in so much pain, and I had to see that I was causing my own pain in order for me to make that change. And one of my favorite things that my sponsor says is like, she says, girl, what you don't change, you choose, you know? And it's like, that's one of the other things that I had to accept really early on, is that like, okay, if I am fighting with addiction, I have to realize that like I am choosing to be uncomfortable right now. I'm choosing this pain. What were you going to say?
No, I'm
okay.
Right along those lines. And, you know, as I said earlier, sometimes you do choose that pain because it's more familiar than the unknown of the abyss that could be great off the edge of that cliff.
Right. And I think that's something, you know, what we haven't talked about is relapse and recovery. And this is something Terry B actually said during our last episode, relapse while being a sober person, and that relapse happening with emotional sobriety, which is like next level sobriety. Next level sobriety. So we have a comment? Let's see that comment.
Anka.
Thank you, Anka. Anka writes, my recovery community is the antidote to my internalized shame and guilt for sure. So much reprogramming happened for me with my sober family. I strive to embody that safe space for others. Yes, relapse is definitely part of the journey of recovery, and no, we do not lose what gains we have made prior to relapse. I showed up randomly drunk with smeared mascara and torn clothes. You could have been in mascara, girl. Mascara and torn clothes at so many set meetings for years before I was ready. I know people were praying for me. I could literally feel. Thank you, Anka.
That's beautiful.
That is really beautiful. Thank you so much, Anka.
So, so this idea, like you were saying, is like we don't lose anything, but I feel like that is attached to shame too, because a lot of times folks will come back. And like the speaker at this, I chaired the 7:30 meeting on Sunday, and the speaker talked about relapse and talked about how initially she would always share, and she would say, I had this time sobriety before this or whatever, until she eventually got to a point where it stopped, where it didn't matter. What I'm learning about my recovery today is what was important in the beginning, the things that were so significant, like the structure and everything. They are not the same for me because I change and grow. Like we're talking about emotional sobriety. Recovery looks different for me today than it did in the beginning. And it'll probably look different tomorrow because what I need every day completely changes. I was going to make one more comment. I've a promise that I didn't know existed when I was all up my ass about like other people's relapses and everything. The magic that you feel when someone goes out and comes back in and gets it because they get it because they're doing the work. That is like one of the best gifts that this brings, because it is such a helpless place when you're on the other end, when someone decides they no longer want this. And how can you not see disaster and whatever you see? But when they come back and they thrive and they step into their own sense of purpose, and yeah, that to me is one of the best gifts that this program gives me.
Yeah, and you know, I feel compelled to say, absolutely, Louis, and I feel compelled to say that, you know, 12-step is just one way, and 12-step doesn't. That might not be the way that a person gets sober. You know, there's we've talked about refuge recovery. There's the names of other programs escape me right now, but I think the takeaway message, and y'all can correct me if I'm wrong, the takeaway message is that there is a life that's possible outside of being consumed by drugs and alcohol or any other process addiction.
Absolutely.
And that life is absolutely worth living. I think that's one of the biggest things for me, that is, when I think about my recovery, is that the biggest difference between what my life was like now versus what it was like then is that there was a time I hated waking up, and now I'm at a place in my life where I just enjoy I enjoy my life, and it's not because I'm happy all the time. It isn't because I don't have any problems, but it's because like deep down inside, I know that I have a life worth living.
Absolutely. And you feel you deserve to be in that life, which is really important. I think the worthiness that comes with going through the process now enables me to wake up in the morning and feel good about what I have, and I think that this idea, regardless of how you get to the place of sobriety and worthiness, comes from connection. I really think that however we get clean, however we stay clean and sober, and especially however we practice emotional sobriety, has to do with how we're connected to ourselves, to our higher power, certainly, and to the community that's supporting us.
Absolutely. So with the last 5 minutes that we have, I think I want to lead us with a question. And that question is, for folks who might be listening, who are struggling with relapse, what's maybe a message that you might want to get out to that person? So while y'all are thinking, I think the first thing that I would want someone to know is that, like, every single thought that you have or feeling that you have that like you're a piece of shit of human being, it's all lies. In my experience, all the shame and all the bullshit that kind of comes up in my head that keeps me in isolation, that to me, in my opinion, is just it's addiction showing up. It's addiction being cunning, baffling, and powerful. Because in my experience, my addiction wants me isolated. It wants me away from people. It wants me to believe the things that are coming up. Because what happens? Because if I believe it, I'll drink myself to death, and that's the ultimate, the outcome of addiction. How about you, Mike? How about you, Louis?
I think that without question, that the fact that you are here, the fact that we are here, is all the worthiness that we need. God put us here for a reason, and we are worthy by simply the fact of showing up. We are worthy. And so you are worthy. I am worthy. And that is something that we need to embrace and share, because it is through that we heal. We heal with each other. So if there was one thing that I would say, that recovery is possible. Recovery is out there. Like you said, you never have to use or drink again if you don't want to. And find connection. Find connection.
Find connection. How about you, Louis?
You know what I always say to my friends who struggle, and sometimes my sponsors, it's like, you know what? The fact that you're still alive means that there's some more that you have to do. And so keep on coming back. Things that are important to you, like, are not always the easiest things, but it's like the fact that if you keep coming back, you at least have an opportunity to get to a better place. So yeah,
you're here because you're supposed to be here.
Absolutely. And we have no idea what's in store for us coming down the road. So my sponsor, I would venture to say he's a pillar of this community. A very wise man, had many years clean and sober, and then went out for many years and came back. Now he has well over 10, and thank God for me and the many lives that he's touched because of it. So you never know what's in store for you, and so don't give up. Don't give up. Please don't give up.
Yeah, as we say, keep coming back. So with that, thank you so much, gentlemen. So with that, we should start closing out. Go ahead, Louis.
The Castro Country Club is a safe and sober community center for all people and a refuge for the LGBTQ recovery community.
We provide programs and services that help people change their lives by supporting personal growth.
And our vision is to reduce the suffering of addiction by connecting people to community, opportunity, and support.
You can find more information, including all the ways to contact us, at www.castrocountryclub.org/podcast.
Yes, and tune in every Tuesday at 4 p.m.-ish Pacific Standard Time when we go live on our Castro Country Club Facebook and YouTube channels.
Find us wherever you listen to podcasts. Hey, before we go, I hear Brand. So I need to tell people that after the camera goes off, we keep chatting for 15 minutes. So you can't leave right away. That's the first thing. Second thing is, that's encouraging folks to go to Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcast, to listen to the rest of our conversation once the camera goes off.
And eventually you'll hear some of those discussions.
And that's a not so subtle shade thrown at Brandon, because Brandon is responsible for uploading our conversation.
Fantastic. No, we sign off. I just want to say how great it's been to be here with you guys and have this conversation.
Thank you for being on. It's always really nice to have you.
Been nice.
Okay, Brandon, cue the music. Hey.